we got to do our due diligence and talk about the thing. We'll turn it into something interesting as we always do. That's my rule. There's the old game and old player versus new game and new player discussion, talking about how like, yeah, man, you know, modern games are easier. Players that are not as powerful can beat the powerful players. And then if you played a really, really good player in an older game, you have no chance of beating them because there's like a bigger skill gap. We talked about this a few times in our lives. Before we get into this too deeply, one thing I have to say, just as a little theory, right? What are the odds that the people who randomly wandered into arcades 20 or 30 years ago were the greatest fighting game players of all time, and no one else could ever get to their level? Greater than the modern era and the ability to learn and improve in our modern era. They were just so far beyond that they happened to walk into arcades back then and they were literally the best, right? But my second thing about this is there's a lot of, you know, people say like old game good, new game bad. There's some nuance here. They have certainly built an easier jump in points for fighting games than previously, right? And regular fighting games like the modern fighting games are also difficult, honestly, to get into still. All competitive games are difficult to get into. And older games, they learn that there's ways to design them or build them that are better. And it's not even just things that are like executionally hard, like moving around in older games is hard. In old games, there was no buffer. So like if something was -4 and you wanted to punish with a 4-frame move, you had to be like frame perfect and punish it. In modern games, there's a buffer to make those kinds of punishes easier. When you played Street Fighter 4 and there was no buffer for punishes and you would do a -3 move, when Bonchan would block PR Rog's dash punch, he would do frame perfect jab in a DP punish, or he would like throw it, and like not a lot of people were, right? Like there was like a difference in like the ability to punish something like this because you practice it a million times. In a modern game, when you block something that's -3 or 4 or whatever, you just hit your normal and the game has a buffer to make it feel better and it just happens. Is it easier? Yes. But is it a better way to design games? Yes, it just feels better to have a buffer. Go back and play like XX, right? Like Guilty Gear plus R, and do jump move, double jump cancel, jump move, and feel how gross that feels compared to like a modern game. It makes you feel like your hands, you're just like, why does it feel so bad to do basic stuff? And there is more precision required to do basic things in old games. It's not like, ooh, it's good that it was so hard before. It was just like, well, it's hard. And once you get used to it, it feels nice to be able to do it. But basic functionality in the game being really hard to access is a little annoying. But it's also like when you play Marvel 3, people who learned how to wave dash or plink dash, those kinds of things are fun to do and fun to execute. And then you play like a modern fighting game, right? The Riot fighting game has a dash button. When you want to wave dash around the screen, you just click the dash button over and over and hold forward or backwards, and your character goes ooh, 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 around the screen like somebody who learned how to plink dash with Magneto would. You have access to better movement with less work with modern game dash buttons compared to before. Are older games harder in various ways? For sure, right? And are old players good at those games? Yeah, there's lots of people who are super dope at those games. Are new games also hard? Yes, they're hard in all the ways that fighting games are hard, and also in the ways that like competitive games will always be difficult. And the level of competition now is so far greater than it ever was back then, right? In terms of just the volume of people and how good you can get so fast. In older days, it's harder to learn because there's less information. You have to live near somewhere to play. You don't have access to top level competition or videos, ideas or strategies very easily. Whereas now you can see the best players in the world play their character and they make guides and videos, and there's like lots of different things, and you have frame counters and training modes, and everybody everywhere on the internet can connect to each other when a DLC character comes out, right? Think about how quickly people assemble information of all their like best combos and ideas and strategies and setups. When I go to sleep, the other side of the world is labbing this character, and I wake up and take all the stuff that they just labbed while I was asleep and then just implement it into my game, and I immediately have access to the collective knowledge of the other side of the world. Do you realize that? Do you realize how powerful that is? And it means that you need to keep up way more. Things are developing much quicker than ever, right? One thing that I see that's really interesting about this, right? The idea that if modern players, like our best modern competitors, which some of them are also older competitors because older players can also be good at modern games. Really, it's about time and energy and effort. In the same way that like, I think the modern players, if there was interest, if the modern players of today's games went back and played those games, then they could be the best at them too. I've seen some people say otherwise. My question is why? What makes the people who played fighting games from back then genetically modified to be able to play these games and like modern players cannot? Do you guys watch chess? The amount of like new good young people in something like chess, which is a very old game, is like always ever changing. There's always some new 10-year-old kid who's like 2,000 rating or some bullshit, and you're like, oh my god, this is outrageous. And yeah, also there's so many executionally difficult things to do in life. And like you just watch these young people just like destroy it. Like you see these violinists who are like 11-year-old kids or something who are like the goats. Like they're just like unbelievable prodigies playing on this fucking violin and shredding and shit. Or if you want to just look across video games, speedrunning is not executionally a very easy thing, especially there are games that are really executionally hard to speedrun. So many young people are interested in it as a hobby. Tetris, the young kid who's just like a Tetris demon. You can just look at Melee. Melee is a really obtuse game. It's a really executionally hard game. Back then they always talked about the gods who are like unbeatable or whatever, right? And then since then they've had multiple eras of top players coming up and up and up. And when Slippy came out, that allows you to play rollback from your house, the first thing I said, everybody with the brain probably thought it also, was like, man, some kid is just gonna boot up and play Slippy and become like an absolute monster because they have access to all the competition in the world from their house and they're a kid. So they don't have like responsibilities that adults have, and they can just grind the game nonstop and be a beast, which is how the old people used to do it back when they were younger. They had the time and energy and effort to dedicate themselves to get good at it. And then as they get older, they don't have that anymore. And new young players are doing that in a new game. Because of the groundwork laid, then it's much easier for them to get to a higher level. Honestly, old people, they're like poking the bear, because what's going to happen when they're like, oh, these young people can't do the execution? When like a little 12-year-old kid's like, I can't do execution, bitch. And then they learn Magneto combos and then they show up at like a Marvel 2 throwback tournament and they just beat up all these old people with their like violin hands. Like the devil is going to come for you. And it's a little 12-year-old who plays violin, who's a goddamn demon, and he's going to show up and just start fucking looping your ass. And he's going to say, fuck the Knicks. And you're like, you don't even know who that is. Like you don't even begin to understand this, and it's going to be bad. And what makes this argument my favorite is that there has like never been a better time to play new and old fighting games. All these new games exist, right? They're out and you can play them. They have lots of cool features and things that you'd want in them. But then there's never been easier access to play more human beings than now in a lot of these old games, right? A lot of them have been retrofitted with better online play. Imagine going from, I don't live in a place where there's an arcade, so I don't have anybody to play Third Strike to like booting up Fightcade and there's like 1,000 people on. Exert has better online, right? Like BB, like Arxis is retrofitting all their old games. It's like the best era. So spending time complaining about modern games is like really wild, especially because it's just like, does anybody believe it, dude? I mean, old people probably believe it because it makes them feel better, but like it doesn't make any sense. Like everybody's getting better all the time, including the people who've been playing for a long time. It's interesting to watch old games because you see some play and decisions and stuff. You're like, wow, this is really interesting. And then you watch it and you're like, man, everybody, like a lot of people suck. This just looks like a ranked match of two gold level players. Even like the top level play, you can see the difference. The average player has gotten so much better. And it's a combination of the two. Games have gotten easier, and also the ability to spread information has gotten better. If like a brand new game came out right now that was as difficult as these old games, the old players didn't have an advantage because they haven't been playing it for 20 years. The new players don't have an advantage because it's not some fundamentally simple game that new players play or something, right? The best players in that game would be the players who grinded it and spent the most time playing it, new or old. That's it. Generations build, right? Like they have all of this information and access to all the stuff that you built on. And then you built on that from the people from 10 years ago. And then those people built on it from the people from 10 years ago. And all the information goes up and like people just get better and better and better and better. The modern players of today will not be beating the modern players of 10 years from today. Not because you were bad, but because they have the ability to build on what you built. So you got it. You can even take credit if it makes you feel any better. And you can argue or say that newer games are easier. Listen, I played games 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, right? I get it. I've been playing fighting games a long time. They simplified the floor to so many aspects of fighting games because it makes playing the game feel better. That's usually the answer of why they did it. If the games were still the same level of difficulty, these young players would grind the execution to do the hard thing and then they would just do it. It's not like modern players couldn't learn to plank. Are you telling me that the microplastics have degraded their bodies so much that they're like unable to fucking do planking? Like, no, they could figure it out. Imagine if Third Strike came out today, how fast there'd be a YouTube video from Diaphone about how to do Kara Fukiage and stun someone with Makoto. There'd be a video from Diaphone tomorrow that's like, they said that I couldn't win a tournament with Makoto. And you think like, oh, well, the execution's so hard, people couldn't figure it out. Like, no, they would do it. If Mena woke up tomorrow and was like, I'm gonna be the fucking GOAT at insert old game here, and he grinded, went around the world traveling and training like he does, do you have doubts that he could do something like that? Like, I have no doubt, zero doubt in my mind that he could be the best at whatever fighting game he wants to be, basically, right? But it's also not like old players are just so bad that they couldn't win in a modern game. It's like neither, right? Neither is true. It feels like somebody needs validation in some way, so we always end up here. But the reality is, like, it's cool, man. Like, I don't know. We're all playing fighting games in like an era that's basically as good as it gets as far as I'm concerned. There's no need to be so worried about if a new player was dropped into the old age, could they do it? Like, yeah, it's so odd. I don't get it. One thing that is very important in modern games is that you have the ability to potentially influence the balance of the game. Anytime you don't do something that the top players or whoever is yelling about, people are gonna be like, oh, these devs are so stupid. Why didn't they just do the thing that Ian Arslan said? Even if the developers make other changes to the game that minimalize that, or like their complaints aren't for every level of play, and also they might not be the best changes for your game. If you don't change the things that people are complaining about one-to-one, people will say, LMFAO, this balance patch fucking sucks because they didn't nerf insert thing here. It doesn't matter what the changes are at all.